Happy New Year, everyone. It is 2025. For one fan base, all of their dreams will come true this year. And for one, the suffering will continue like never before. This is Locked On MLB.
You are Locked On MLB, your daily MLB podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, baseball fans, and welcome to Locked On MLB, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. This is the daily podcast. We talk about all of Major League Baseball. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully. Follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter or whatever it's called now. And on Instagram, I'm your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball on Blue Sky, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. And today's episode, the first one of 2025, on this January 1, 2025, we are sponsored by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel because right now new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Wow, 2025. That's like 6 years after Blade Runner took place. This is so weird. And let me tell you something. There is going to be a fan base that is going to look back eventually at 2025 as, the greatest of years. Now, it may be a fan base that hasn't had a World Series for a long time or maybe ever. Remember in 2023, the Texas Rangers got off the schneid. In 2019, Washington saw their first World Series title since the 1924 team with Walter Johnson. Now, it could be that the Los Angeles Dodgers could repeat. It's so awful that they repeat. They may have a great moment from Shohei Ohtani. The Yankees could win. The Mets could win. Or there could be an absolute stunner coming in there that nobody saw coming. And inevitably, every year, one franchise will see the simmering of their frustration get worse. I grew up in New England as a Boston Red Sox fan, and I saw the suffering of the Red Sox as an abstract all those years where they couldn't make the playoffs when I was growing up. And then like a boat paddled to the face in 1986 when I was 14 years old, the first time I saw them in the postseason. And for some teams, that suffering ferments and gets stronger and stronger. And the minute they win a World Series, so much of the awfulness just gets wiped away. Well, for years and years, the three suffering teams were the three teams that had the most suffering, the fan bases with the most suffering for most of my life were the two Chicago teams and the Red Sox. The Cubs hadn't won since 1908. The White Sox hadn't won since 1917, and the Red Sox hadn't won since 1918. And so those were the three gold standards of suffering. And then the Red Sox won in 2004, the White Sox won in 2005. And when the Cubs won in 2016, I started thinking, how do we figure out who the most suffering fan base is right now? And I created in 2017 the Suffering Index. That's right. I wanted to quantify suffering. I wanted to come up with a number and a formula to figure out which fan base is suffering the most. And since 2016, it has been tweaked here and there. Some people pointed out some of the flaws. But I want to tell you, this is how I figure out the Suffering Index, because I want to take into account how long fans have been waiting for a World Series title or even a pennant. Teams that have had a bunch of recent World Series titles have given their fans less reason to suffer. I like to point out times that fan bases have been waiting for appearance in the World Series, how many times they've lost a do-or-die game, whether it's a Game 7 of the World Series, the League Championship Series, a Game 5 of the Division Series, or a one-game playoff, or a wild card game, or a Game 3 of a wild card series. And I also want to take into account the number of sub 500 seasons they've had since their last World Series. and how many 100-loss seasons they've had since their last World Series, to sort of point out the teams that have had basically given their fans nothing to root for. And I weigh it in a certain way in terms of how I figured it out. And so the formula is this. This is the formula for the suffering index. I take the number of years since the team last won a World Series. Then I add the number of years since the team's last pennant, and I divide that by 4, because that's not as strong as the last World Series title, but I'm gonna weigh it a little less. The number of years since the World Series title before their last one. So, for example, the Dodgers' most recent World Series championship was 2024, 1 year ago, last season. The most recent one before that would be 2020. So those are 2 pretty close championships. For the Cubs, it would be 2016, and the one before that would be 1908. I take that number of years, I divide that by 16. Then I take the number of deciding games or one-game playoffs that they've lost since the last World Series they've won. Those moments where we could have won. I take that number and I multiply that by 10. Then I take the number of deciding or one-game playoffs that they've won since their last World Series title, and I subtract that from the total. And I also add the number of sub 500 seasons since their last World Series title. I multiply that by 2, and the number of 100 lost seasons they've had since their last World Series title, and I multiply that by 3. This formula is going to be in the description. And if you think that's too complicated, someone explain to me how they figure out WAR. Exactly. At least I'm going to show you what the formula is. Some things are given a stronger impact on the final score, and whatever score is the lowest, that fan base has the least amount of suffering, the least number of reasons to complain. And whichever team has the highest number, that's the suffering index champion, who last year was Cleveland. Now, we're going to go through this. We're going to go through this, and we're going to figure out which fan base has the most to suffer and the least reason to suffer. And we're going to start at number 30, the fan base that has nothing to complain about. There is no suffering for this team. It is the defending champion Los Angeles Dodgers, whose suffering index comes in at 1.94. They're down 1 spot from last year. They were 29 last year. Now they're 30. So, there's nothing to suffer for a Dodger fan. They've won 2 this decade. Yes, I'm counting the COVID series, and they probably had a couple of World Series taken away from them in the Astros series. And they look like they're in great shape for next year. So Dodger fans, you have nothing to complain about. The only other team with a single-digit suffering index would be the Atlanta Braves, coming in at number 29 with an 8.81. That's helped by the fact that they've been in the playoffs recently and they have a recent World Series title. Talk about recent World Series titles. That's going to also give us the Texas Rangers, whose suffering index is 1125. They were hampered by the fact that they had a losing record last year, but things are looking up for the Rangers, who it's a every other year for Bruce Bochy, so they're probably going to win this year. Now, cover your eyes, Dodger fans and Yankee fans, because at number 27, I have the Houston Astros. And yes, I am counting the 2017 World Series in this. Constantly in the playoffs, constantly winning big, going to the pennant several times. They were hampered by the fact that since the 2022 World Series championship, they did lose a Game 7 to Texas last year. That hurt their score a little bit, but it's still really, really low at their number 27. Don't complain, Astros fans. Believe it or not, don't complain, Red Sox fans either. They're at number 26 with 15.50. I know they had a losing season last year, and they haven't looked very good recently, but the fact that they won the World Series in 2018 and 2013 and don't have a lot of do-or-die games that they've lost since 2018 really helps them out, those recent championships. Red Sox fans complain, but the numbers show they probably shouldn't. Now, for a team that's had a couple of 100 lost seasons since their last World Series title, we're here seeing the Washington Nationals at number 25. Same place they were last year with a 30.06 suffering index. Still, that recent World Series title and no big postseason losses since then helps them out. Cub fans have been mad that their team can be pretty cheap, but they're sitting at number 24. The biggest thing raising that total for them is the fact that they have lost a do or die game in the wild card game against Colorado, and the fact that their previous World Series title after 2016 was 1908. And at number 23, it's the Kansas City Royals, who improved their score a little bit because of getting back into the postseason this last year. They've had some 100 lost seasons since winning the World Series in 2015. And at number 22, the Giants. Clumping those World Series titles recently has helped them, but they've also not seen the postseason in a little bit, only one appearance since the 2016 wildcard game. And the fact that they lost a do-or-die game to the Dodgers kind of raised their score a little bit. Hey, a franchise that had no reason to suffer about 10 years ago is now at 21, the Cardinals. Yes, they had relatively recent World Series titles, but they've also lost some do-or-die games, including a walk-off wildcard game loss to the Dodgers in 2021, and they've missed the playoffs the last few years. At number 20, the Philadelphia Phillies, who are due to win a World Series title and see that total plummet. But they've lost some big games too, and not the least of which was Ryan Howard falling in a heap in 2011 and losing that final game to Arizona. That's right. All those do-or-die games lost since the last World Series title do build up on that suffering index. And there are a couple of teams that you are going to see are killed by that metric, killed by the fact that if you lose a do-or-die game, it affects your numbers, because let me tell you, that is a surefire sign that your fan base is suffering big time. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of the other ones and then explain why there is a new caveat to the suffering index for this year. All right, let's hear from our friends over at FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. And look, I love betting on which players will score a touchdown or how many points the team will score. I even put down some money on who will get a safety, and that will come through for me one of these days. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. Okay, let's return to our look at the suffering index. We have at number 19, we have the Angels. The main thing not hurting the Angels is they haven't lost a lot of do or die games recently. They also haven't had a lot of trips to the postseason, so the number of losing seasons they've had really hurt the Angels. I wish I could create a metric of number of times they have wasted MVP seasons. The Yankees have improved their suffering index with a trip to the postseason, but still waiting for a World Series title. And they have a bunch of do-or-die games that they've lost. They lost a do-or-die game since the 2009 World Series title, including to the Tigers in 2011. They lost the wild card game to the Red Sox in 2021. And they lost Game 7 of the ALCS to the Astros. Trash can that one. They lost a do-or-die game to the Rays in the COVID division series. A bunch of those games have all added up to some Yankee misery. And for people who think it's easy being a Yankee fan, hey, if you don't remember 2009, if you're too young to remember 2009, being a Yankee fan means your lone World Series experience was the one we just had, and that's rough. The Diamondbacks are at number 17 at 65 even, up one from last year. Their trip to the Pennant last year helped them out. A couple of do-or-die games that they've lost, including a walk-off game to Milwaukee. That doesn't help matters. They do have a World Series title, but that's now 24 years ago. How old am I? Number 16, we have the Marlins, who, lest we forget, were a playoff team as recently as 2023 and have as many World Series titles to their name as the Philadelphia Phillies. But those bad years are starting to pile up. They've never lost a do-or-die playoff game, so they have that going for them. But they've only been to the postseason twice since winning the World Series in 2003. In fact, they've only been to the postseason 4 times in their existence. One of them was as recently as 2 years ago, and now they're terrible. Come on, Marlins. Your fans deserve better. At number 15, we have the Toronto Blue Jays. And the Blue Jays are a strange team because they do have World Series titles from the 90s. The 90s are a while ago now, Sully, and they have some key do-or-die games that they've lost, including the bat flip game by Bautista and the walk-off game by Encarnacion. Those hurt. Speaking of hurting, the worst team in the history of baseball played last year for Chicago. That would be the White Sox. Those 100-loss seasons are starting to build up. They do have a World Series title in 2005. The previous one was 17, not 2017, 1917. And they'll continue to climb up the ranks if they continue to pile up 100-loss seasons. The Minnesota Twins, well, they got off the schneid not too long ago to finally advance in a playoff series. And they did win a do-or-die game against the A's in 2002, but they've also had some rough games, including losing the wild card game to the Yankees, losing a one-game playoff to the Chicago White Sox in 2008, and putting together a bunch of teams where they make the playoffs, but they can't really advance. At number 12, we got the Colorado Rockies, who have yet to win a World Series, have yet to win a World Series game. They got swept their lone appearance and have a bunch of 100-loss seasons to their name, and I don't know what we have cooking up. The Rays are interesting at number 11 because they've also lost a bunch of do-or-die games along the way, including some wild card games in Game 5 of the Division Series, and still waiting for their first World Series title. There's a chance they may skyrocket to the top 3 of suffering. I'll get to that later. Now we're in the top 10 where we have the Cincinnati Reds, who have been waiting since 1990 to win a World Series or a pennant and have had some super frustrating games along the way and some gut punches in the postseason. Speaking of gut punches in the postseason, the Mets. The Mets are number 9. It's been since 86 since they've won the World Series, and they've also had some real heartbreaking games along the way, including a couple of Game 7s of the National League Championship Series that were absolute gut punches, and a thrilling wild card game loss in 2016. They've had some good seasons, to be sure, but they've been giving their fans a lot of frustration recently. So maybe that's why Cohen wants to spend all this money, because their fans are a top 10 frustration team. The Orioles are also a top 10 frustration thing at number 8. They've been waiting since 1983 to even appear in the World Series, and they've had some crushing games that they've lost. Obviously the Encarnacion game to Toronto. They lost the Game 5 of the Division Series. There have been some rough games in Baltimore Orioles history. Seattle Mariners are number 7. One of the main reasons is they've never appeared in a World Series, let alone win one. And they've had some crushing losses. Some Game 5s, and, well, let's face it, when you have wasted several primes of MVPs and Hall of Famers and still have yet to appear in a World Series, you're going to have some suffering fans along the way. The San Diego Padres are one of the most underrated suffering fan bases, and now that we're in the top 6 here, The fact that the Padres have never won the World Series, the fact that the Padres have lost some tough games, they lost another do-or-die game this year, and they've lost some rough games along the way. This is the moment for the Padres, which is why they can't possibly blow the team up, because this is one of the top 10 suffering fan bases in all of baseball, and they got to do something about it. The Tigers are creeping their way up. They're at number 5 right now. It's been since 1984 since they've won, and they've lost some crushing games, some heartbreakers along the way. And they lost a heartbreaker this year. Another do-or-die game was put on the ledger, this time to, of all teams, Cleveland. The Athletics, notice I didn't say Oakland. I'll get to that in a little bit, are at number 4. I'll get to this placement again in a little bit. The A's are number 4 purely for their on-the-field work. It's been since 89 since they've won. The thing that kills the A's score are all the do-or-die games. The division, think of the game 5s of the division series they lost in 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, 2012, 2013, a wild card game in 2014, a wild card game in against Tampa in 2019, against the Yankees in 2018. That's 9 right there. When you consider each one of those are worth 10, that's 90 on your suffering index just from those do-or-die games. In any of those years, the A's could have advanced, but it's been since 89 since they've won it all. Milwaukee, again, losing a lot of do-or-die games, and that includes Game 7 of the 1982 World Series. That's right. Those games are still on the ledger, as is the Game 7 of the NLCS against Los Angeles. And yet this year, with the Pete Alonso home run, they all pile up. And I also made an adjustment with the Milwaukee score because they've never won the World Series, and I dated it back to 1970, which was the first year of the Milwaukee Brewers. I've made the adjustment because Milwaukee has had a World Series title, and this is about fan bases suffering. So the Brewers have never won a title. The Milwaukee Braves won the 1957 title. So I stretch back the suffering of Milwaukee fans back to 57, which means, yeah, it hurts, but they're still waiting to win another title. Now, all those do-or-die games lost have really sunk the Pirates, as they are at almost 200. They're at 198.88. And the Francisco Cabrera game is still holding over this. The called strike 3 on Andy Van Slyke is still holding over this. The wild card games where they had to face Jake Arrieta and Madison Bumgarner are still hanging over them. And Chris Carpenter's shutout. All the times they've been shut out, a complete game shutout has sunk the Pittsburgh Pirates along the way. In any of those years, they could have advanced. Instead, we're waiting since the 1979 Pirates are still the last team. Which brings us to number 1 temporarily. The Guardians, the Indians, the Naps, call them what you will. It's now been 77 years since a Cleveland team has won the World Series. And I think about all those years where the gold standard had been the White Sox, Cubs, and Red Sox for long-term waiting for a World Series title. Well, think about the Red Sox won their title waiting for 86 years. The White Sox waited for 88 years. The Cleveland franchise is now at 77. They are knocking on that same number. And if they don't win it soon, which is why it really frustrates the hell out of me that the Dolans don't spend money to wipe this off and finally deliver a title to Cleveland. And that also includes losing 2 Game 7s of the World Series in extra innings. This is a franchise that you have to be pushing your chips in the center of the table and trying to win right away. All right, so there you go. The Cleveland fans, the Cleveland Guardian fans, call them what you will, are the most suffering fans in all of baseball, according to my formula. Right? Well, the events of this year had made me add something. And I realized that as horrible as things are in Cleveland, believe it or not, there are two franchises whose fan bases very well could be suffering more than the good folks of Cleveland. I love going to live events. I love going to sporting events. I love going to baseball games, hockey games. I love going to comedy. I love going to theater. One of my favorite moments in last year was going to Game 6 of the National League Championship Series at Dodger Stadium. And the energy and the excitement there was unbelievable. And I got my tickets through Game Time. Now Game Time has made it easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And when I was looking for get those tickets for the National League Championship Series, I used the Game Time app with Game Time Picks. I found amazing deals. I could even see the view from my seat before I was buying. And the super deal was particularly impressive. I got great seats, unbeatable prices, and the app's all-in pricing shows the total upfront cost, no surprise fees at checkout, and the best part, when I won, I got paid instantly. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It is game time. I mentioned in the Game Time spot that I just read that I attended the Dodgers clinching the pennant. That was the second most memorable game I went to this year. I also went to the final game at the Oakland Coliseum, and I saw the crying and the suffering that was going on there. And it made me realize I had to create a new part of the suffering index. Now, you'll notice I got the Expos pennant up there. I was thinking, how do I fit the Expos in here? And I wound up calculating using the formula that the Expos suffering index would be 128.75, which would put them in the top 10 of all suffering. But there's an element to Montreal fandom, which now sticks with Oakland fandom, which is their team was taken away from them. And that is a unique form of suffering, not just losing the World Series, not just losing a pennant, not just losing a playoff game, having your team ripped away from you, and in both ways in a long, laborious, stupid way. The Expos were sitting in their stadium knowing they're going to be moved, seeing Major League Baseball run this team into the ground. And in the instance with the A's, to see it happening because of a billionaire's personal greed. That the fact that those fans had their team ripped from them, taken away in an ugly, cynical manner, has to be a suffering that's through the roof. I would put the Brooklyn fans up here as well, except I think most of them, there are not many left. And I think most of them adopted the Mets along the way and found salvation with the 69 World Series title. But there is no baseball team in Montreal right now, and there's no baseball team in Oakland for the foreseeable future. So what I decided to do was, you got to add 200 to it. That is a suffering that is unbelievable. And so I have the Expos with 328.75 at number 2. And the A's with everything. They were already top 4 suffering. But then to rip the team away, they're number 1. You note the shirt that I have here. This is not an official shirt because they're the Athletics. They don't play in a city. They're going to play in Sacramento, and I still believe they're going to stay in Sacramento. And we're going to have to figure out where Sacramento fits in all of this when I do the suffering index this year. But do you know what? I can say I witnessed it firsthand. The Athletics fans in Oakland, they're suffering more because they had all those brutal losses. They've had those times when it slipped away, and then they cruelly had their team ripped from them. And sadly, Montreal and Oakland fans won't be able to have their suffering quenched this year, but maybe one of these teams, if my team's out of it, I'm going to root for one of the teams in the top 10 of suffering. Do you know why? Because I've seen fan bases that were suffering like no one else. San Francisco Giant fans couldn't win with Mays, couldn't win with Bonds. Obviously the Red Sox, obviously the Cubs, obviously the White Sox. Ranger fans went through so much. Washington fans went through so much. So when Royals fans went through so much. So when a team finally wins that title and you see that look of generational joy, that's when you know a lot of suffering has been wiped out. And 2025 is going to give one fan base a ton of happiness this year. And at least one fan base is going to be looking to the heavens and thinking, really? Really? Let's get this year started, shall we? Follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter or whatever it's called now, and on Instagram. I am your pal Sully. I am at Sully Baseball on Blue Sky, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. Starting the year by talking about suffering. Isn't that bad karma? This has been Locked On MLB for January 1, 2025. I'm your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully.